Have you ever heard a story so unexpected, so quietly powerful, that it makes you stop whatever you are doing and rethink what truly keeps a person alive? What if I told you that one of the most influential princes in Saudi Arabia, a man surrounded by the world's best doctors, cutting-edge equipment, and unlimited resources, reached a moment when none of it mattered? And the only person who knew what to do was a Filipino nurse. And what if the thing that saved him was not medicine, not technology, not even a procedure you could find in any hospital handbook? It sounds impossible. It almost feels too cinematic to be real. But this story, once you hear it, may change the way you look at compassion, humility, and the quiet strength of Filipino caregivers around the world. People often imagine royalty living lives far removed from ordinary reality. They picture palaces, wealth, privilege, and a level of comfort that shields them from the struggles that most people face. But illness is the great equalizer. It does not bow to crowns or titles. And on one quiet evening in Riyadh, inside a private wing of one of the most prestigious hospitals in the Middle East, a Saudi prince known for his influence, his intellect, and his unshakable presence, found himself slipping into a dangerous place, both physically and emotionally. Doctors had done everything they could. Specialists had flown in from Europe and the US. Machines surrounded his bed, blinking red and green, monitoring every breath. The room smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Yet despite all the intervention, his condition kept worsening. Not in a dramatic way, but in subtle shifts that frightened the medical team more than any sudden crisis would. And then something happened. Something small, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to draw the prince's personal physician away from the monitors. He had never seen the prince look so lost. Not in pain, not in fear, but in a deep, suffocating loneliness. It was in that moment that a Filipino nurse named Daniel quietly entered the room. Daniel had been assigned to the prince only a few days earlier. A gentle man in his mid-40s, soft-spoken, respectful, always listening more than he talked. The kind of person who blended into the background unless you paid attention. The kind of caregiver who didn't need to announce anything because his presence alone made the room feel calmer. Most of the doctors barely noticed him at first. In a place like that where so many professionals with years of experience fought to save a life, a simple nurse from another country did not stand out. But that night was different. When Daniel stepped inside, the prince opened his eyes. Not fully, just slightly, as if sensing something familiar, something safe. Daniel greeted him the way he always did, simple, warm, grounded. "Good evening, Your Highness, I am here." That was it. No medical orders, no complicated explanations, just the assurance of presence. But something about those words made the prince's breathing change. The monitors did not show improvement. Yet everyone in the room felt a shift, a micro-shock, subtle but visible. The prince reached out weakly and tried to hold Daniel's hand. Not the hand of the doctor, not the hand of the specialist. His hand. The physician hesitated. This was not in the protocols. This was not part of the treatment plan. There was no instruction in any medical book that said a patient's recovery might begin with something as simple as human presence. But Daniel understood something that machines could not measure. He walked to the bedside, bowed his head slightly in respect, and held the prince's hand. In that moment something cracked open, not in the body, but in the heart. Because what the prince needed most was not another injection or a higher dosage. It was something he had not felt in months, something no one around him had realized he was missing. Something so simple that in the world of royalty, power, and protocol, it often disappears. Human connection, and this is where the story truly begins. Before this night, Daniel had noticed small things, details that others overlooked. The way the prince would stare at the window even when the curtains were closed. The way he flinched when another specialist spoke too loudly. The way he refused food, not because he lacked appetite, but because no one ever stayed long enough to ask him what he truly wanted. Daniel had cared for countless patients before. In Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, even briefly in Oman, he had seen what illness does not only to the body, but to the soul. And he had learned through years of watching people fight silently for one more day that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from medicine, but from something else entirely. So as he stood there holding the prince's trembling hand, he asked a question no one had asked yet. "Your Highness, do you want me to open the curtains?" It seemed like a meaningless offer, a small gesture, but the prince blinked slowly, and for the first time since his condition worsened, a single tear slid down the corner of his eye. Daniel opened the curtains. The desert night poured in, soft and golden, with the moon hanging low over the horizon like a silent guardian. The lights of Riyadh shimmered in the distance, a reminder of life beyond the sterile walls of the hospital. The prince stared at the view, his breathing eased, not recovered, not healed, but softened. And Daniel realized something profound, something that no doctor, no specialist, no machine had understood. The prince was not dying from his illness alone. He was dying from isolation. And the only way back was not through another procedure. It was through something deeply human, something Daniel had seen in Filipino families all his life, something he had carried quietly into every room he ever walked into. Care. Not the professional kind, the human kind. And that was the beginning of a journey that no one in that hospital, no one in the entire kingdom expected. The days that followed carried a quiet tension through the private wing of the hospital. Specialists rotated in and out, discussing lab results, adjusting medications, and preparing contingency plans in case the prince's condition declined again. Yet something unspoken lingered among them. The awareness that, for reasons none of them fully understood, the prince responded more to Daniel's presence than to any treatment. It wasn't that the doctors lacked skill. They were among the best in the world, but even they couldn't deny the simple truth staring back at them from the monitors. Whenever Daniel entered the room, the prince's vitals steadied. His heart rate calmed, his breathing deepened. His agitation faded into stillness. At first, some of the team dismissed it. Coincidence, they said. Patients have good hours and bad ones. But when the pattern repeated itself day after day, moment after moment, the head physician began paying closer attention to the rhythm of the room. One evening, after the rest of the team left, he stayed behind and observed quietly from the corner. Daniel didn't notice at first. He was focused on adjusting the prince's pillow, speaking in a gentle tone, narrating each movement as if guiding a frightened child back into safety. "Your Highness, I will move this just a little. Tell me if it feels better. No rush, no orders, just respect." The physician watched the prince relax under Daniel's care, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something unsettling. Humility. How could a simple nurse understand something that an entire team of specialists had missed? The answer revealed itself in a way none of them expected. That night, the prince struggled with confusion and fear, a common but deeply troubling complication of prolonged illness. He kept whispering something in Arabic, repeating it under his breath, half dreaming, half pleading. The room felt suffocating, heavy with a sadness that seemed older than his illness. Daniel leaned closer, listening. He did not understand the words, but he understood the tone, the longing, the ache beneath them. Then softly he began speaking not in English, not in Arabic, but in the warm cadence of his own language. "Nandito lang po ako, Your Highness. Hindi ko po kayo iiwan. I am here. I will not leave you." The head physician felt something tighten in his chest. This was not textbook nursing. This was not medical intervention. This was something deeper. Something that reached a part of the prince no medication could touch. The prince's whispers slowed, his breathing grew deeper. His face softened, and then in a fragile voice, almost lost under the hum of the machines, he responded, "Do not leave." It was the first clear sentence he had spoken in 2 days. From that moment on, the prince refused to be cared for by anyone except Daniel. He asked for him in the morning. He waited for him in the evening. When Daniel was on break, he became restless, scanning the doorway, searching for the familiar face that grounded him in a storm he could no longer navigate alone. Some questioned it, others resisted. But the prince's condition improved more in 48 hours under Daniel's quiet presence than it had in 2 months of aggressive medical care. There was something about the Filipino way of caring, something deeply cultural, almost instinctive, that transcended tasks and protocols. It was the way Daniel treated the prince not as royalty, not as a patient, but as a human being. And it was this humanity that slowly reopened doors inside the prince's heart that had been locked for years. One afternoon, when the desert sun cast a warm haze across the room, the prince finally spoke more clearly. "You remind me," he said, voice trembling, "of one I lost." Daniel paused, not pushing, not probing. He waited, patient as always. "My mother," the prince whispered. "She used to sit by my bed when I was young. She never left. Even when the palace was busy, even when everyone wanted her attention." He swallowed. The memory hurt, but it was also a lifeline. "You sit the same way she did." Daniel felt a gentle ache rise in his own chest. This was the truth many never understood. Filipinos carry their families with them wherever they go. Their kindness is shaped by countless nights of watching over loved ones, countless moments of wiping brows, comforting fears, holding hands in silence. They know the language of care in its purest form. The prince continued, struggling with words, yet determined to let them out. "Everyone here gives me treatment, but you give me peace." Those words pierced through the physician standing outside the curtains. For the first time, he understood that they had been treating the prince's body while neglecting his spirit. They had been fighting the visible symptoms, but not the invisible wounds. The fear, the loneliness, the quiet collapse inside him. And only Daniel had seen it. As evening approached, Daniel did something simple, something small, yet something that would become the turning point of everything. He brought a small speaker from his bag. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just a simple device worn around the edges from years of use. He placed it on the bedside table and glanced at the prince for permission. "May I play something for you, Your Highness?" "Something calming," the prince nodded weakly. Daniel pressed play. What filled the room was not medical music therapy, not classical compositions, not Arabic chants. It was a soft Filipino lullaby, a melody mothers hum to their children, a tune older than memory itself. The prince closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, he slept without medication. The entire night, the medical team stared at the morning readings in disbelief. His blood pressure stabilized, his heart rhythm smoothed, his oxygen levels increased, not dramatically but steadily, like a body finally allowed to rest without fear. When the prince awoke, he looked at Daniel with a clarity none of them had seen in weeks. "You brought me home," he whispered. Those 5 words changed everything, because in that moment, everyone finally understood. What was saving the prince wasn't medicine, it was humanity. The thing Daniel carried not in his hands, but in his heart. And this was only the beginning of the transformation for the prince, for the medical team, and for Daniel himself, who never imagined that his quiet compassion would one day ripple across a royal family. Over the next several days, an almost unbelievable shift began unfolding inside the private royal wing. The prince, once trapped between exhaustion and despair, began responding to life again, not with sudden miracles or dramatic recoveries, but with the kind of small, steady awakenings that Daniel recognized from countless patients he had cared for over the years. He began eating small meals again, asking for water without prompting, and even requesting the curtains be opened before Daniel arrived, as if preparing himself for the little rituals that had quietly stitched hope back into his days. The palace-appointed physician observed everything with a mixture of relief and reverence. What baffled him most was not the improvement, but what triggered it. Soft lullabies, a warm presence, a hand held without rush or expectation, quiet words whispered in Tagalog, even though the prince understood none of it. It defied every principle of textbook medicine. Yet in its simplicity, it revealed a truth no specialist had dared to consider. The prince had not been fighting only a physical illness. He had been fighting a spiritual collapse. One afternoon, as Daniel offered the prince a cup of warm tea, the head physician finally approached with a question that had been weighing on him for days. "What is it you are doing?" he asked gently, not with suspicion, but with genuine curiosity. "What do you see that we do not?" Daniel paused, unsure if he even had an answer. But after a moment, he spoke with the same sincerity he brought into every room he entered. "I'm not doing anything extraordinary, Doctor. I'm simply letting him know he is not alone." The physician blinked, as if hearing something so obvious it felt profound. But it wasn't obvious, not in that hospital. Not in that world. In the world of royalty, vulnerability is carefully hidden. Weakness is tucked away behind protocol. Loneliness is a quiet wound no one dares to acknowledge. And this prince, surrounded by power all his life, had been drowning in silence long before his body began failing. That evening, the prince asked for something surprising. "Daniel," he said softly, his voice still fragile, "tell me about your home." Daniel smiled. "My home, Your Highness?" "Yes," the prince whispered. "Tell me what it is like." No one had asked Daniel that question in years. In most of his assignments abroad, people saw him only as a caregiver, a pair of hands performing tasks, rarely as a person with a life, memories, and dreams of his own. So he told the prince about his hometown in the Philippines, about the narrow streets lined with sari-sari stores, the laughter of children chasing each other under the hot sun, the church bells ringing on Sundays, and the smell of freshly cooked rice filling the house every evening. He told him about his mother, who used to sing the same lullaby he played in the prince's room. He spoke of the ocean, the storms, the fiestas, and the long evenings when neighbors gathered outside their homes simply to share stories. As he spoke, the prince listened intently, eyes drifting toward the window where the desert light softened into evening gold. "It sounds like a place," the prince said slowly, "where people still see each other." Daniel nodded. "Yes, Your Highness. We take care of one another, even when life is hard." A quiet moment followed, the kind that lingers long after the last word fades. Then the prince said something that stunned Daniel. "I envy that." Coming from a man who had lived with privilege unimaginable to most, the confession carried a weight Daniel could feel. The prince had grown up surrounded by wealth, luxury, and power. Yet the simple human warmth Daniel described felt foreign to him. The prince's voice trembled as he continued. "In my world, everyone protects me, but no one stays." Those words echoed in the room, sinking into both men with a truth neither could ignore. It was a turning point, not only in the prince's healing, but in Daniel's understanding of why he had been sent to this assignment in the first place. It was not coincidence, it was not luck, and it certainly was not random scheduling by the hospital administration. Something larger had placed him there. Over the next few days, Daniel's care deepened, not in the technical sense, but in the emotional one. He taught the prince breathing exercises used by elderly patients in the barangay where he once volunteered. He told gentle stories from Filipino families who survived hardship through unity. He played quiet songs from Visayas, Luzon, and Mindanao that carried the soul of a people whose strength came from resilience and love. And slowly the prince began opening up more, not about politics, not about the palace, but about the child he once was, the young man who felt unseen, and the adult who carried too many responsibilities too quietly. His recovery, while still fragile, began accelerating in ways that surprised even the most experienced members of the medical team. The consultants called it psychological stabilization. The royal advisors called it emotional grounding. But the truth was simpler. Daniel gave the prince something no one else dared to give him, permission to be human. And that permission changed everything. One night after the prince had fallen asleep to a soft lullaby, the head physician pulled Daniel aside. His voice was unusually gentle. "Nurse Daniel," he said, "I have a difficult question. You may refuse if you wish." Daniel looked up worried. "What is it, doctor?" "The Royal Council wants to meet you." Daniel's heart stopped. "The council?" He repeated, "Yes. They have been observing the prince's progress. His condition was declared critical only a week ago. Now he is stabilizing in ways none of us predicted." Daniel swallowed hard. "Doctor, I was only doing my duty." The physician shook his head. "You were doing more than that, and they know." For the first time since the prince had fallen ill, Daniel felt a wave of fear. Not for his job, not for the prince, but because he had never imagined that simple acts of compassion could ripple all the way to the highest levels of the kingdom. "What do they want from me?" Daniel asked quietly. The physician exhaled. They want to understand what you did and why it worked. Daniel looked back at the prince, sleeping peacefully, a peace no machine had been able to give him. And in that moment, he realized something profound. The royal family thought they were about to uncover a secret technique. But what Daniel had given the prince wasn't a technique. It was the one thing the world often forgets to measure: humanity. And the meeting with the royal council waiting just beyond the horizon would soon reveal how deeply that truth would transform everyone involved. The meeting with the royal council was set for late evening, when the palace hallways grew quiet and the hospital's private wing felt more like a sanctuary than a medical facility. Daniel stood outside the designated conference room, his hands lightly trembling despite years of experience in high-pressure environments. He had faced critical nights, emergency calls, and life-or-death decisions. But this was different. This time he was not only a nurse. He was a question the royal family wanted answered. When the doors opened, he stepped into a room that felt both intimidating and strangely solemn. A long table, several council members in traditional attire, quiet advisors taking notes, and at the far end, the prince's personal physician, who gave Daniel a reassuring nod. They did not start with accusations. They started with curiosity. One of the elder council members spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "Nurse Daniel," he said, "we have been closely monitoring the prince's condition. We were told that when he was at his weakest, when medicine was no longer enough, something about your presence changed his path. We would like to understand what you did." Daniel lowered his gaze in respect. "Your Excellencies," he replied softly, "I followed the doctor's orders. I administered the medication on time. I monitored his vital signs. But I believe that is not what you are asking." A faint smile tugged at the elder's lips. "You are correct," he said. "We know what the doctors did. We know what the machines did. We want to know what you did that they did not." Daniel hesitated, searching for words that could make something so simple sound worthy of this room. "I stayed," he finally said. The room fell silent. A few council members exchanged glances. One of them leaned forward. "What do you mean you stayed?" Daniel took a careful breath. "When the prince was restless at night, I stayed by his bedside, instead of just checking and leaving. When he was afraid, I did not wait for a new order or a new drug. I held his hand. I spoke to him softly. I treated him not as a royal patient, but as a human being who was tired and afraid. I played him songs from my country that bring comfort to families back home. I opened the curtains when he wanted to see the world outside. I listened when he wanted to talk. I was simply there." One of the younger council members frowned slightly. "But that is not medicine." Daniel nodded gently. "No, Your Excellency, it is not medicine. But I have learned that sometimes the body refuses to heal when the heart has already given up. I could not give him more life. That is beyond my power. But I could give him something that made life worth holding on to." The prince's physician spoke up, his tone filled with respect. "I have observed it myself," he said. "His Highness responded more to the presence of this nurse than to any sedative. His rest, his breathing, even his mental clarity improved significantly with simple human interaction. I've practiced medicine for many years, but this experience has humbled me." Another council member, one who had remained quiet until now, asked a question that went deeper. "Why you?" he said. "Why would he respond to you in this way?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he thought of his mother in the Philippines, sitting by his grandfather's bed during long nights, humming softly even when she was exhausted. He thought of neighbors coming together when someone was sick, bringing food, prayers, and company, never letting anyone suffer alone. He thought of how for Filipinos, caring was not something you clock in and out of. It was part of who you are. "Perhaps," Daniel said slowly, "because I cared for him the way my people care for family. In my country, we do not leave someone alone when they are sick, especially when they are near the edge. We sit with them, we talk to them, we let them feel that they are still part of this world." I did not see a prince in that bed. I saw a man who was tired of being strong. The elder council member studied him for a long moment. "You are saying," he began, "that the turning point in his condition came not from more treatment, but from being treated as family?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Your Excellency." There was a long silence, heavy but not hostile. It was the silence of people wrestling with a truth that challenged everything they thought they understood. Then slowly the elder leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "For years," he said, "we have hired Filipino nurses and caregivers because of their reputation. We have heard our people say that they are patient, kind, devoted. Many of our families will not trust anyone else. But this is the first time someone has stood before this council and explained why in such simple terms." His gaze softened. "It is not their hands alone we are hiring. It is their hearts." The meeting did not end with applause or dramatic declarations. It ended with something far more powerful: recognition. A quiet, profound recognition that what had kept the prince alive during his darkest nights was not a breakthrough drug or a complex machine. It was a Filipino nurse who refused to let him feel alone. Days turned into weeks. The prince's recovery continued, slow but steady. He began spending short intervals sitting up, then longer periods speaking without fatigue. He no longer woke up in confusion. The nightmares that once haunted him faded into calmer sleep. One afternoon, as the sky over Riyadh turned a deep shade of gold, the prince asked for something unexpected. "Bring Daniel to the palace when I am discharged," he told his advisors. "I want to see him there, not as my nurse, but as my guest." When the day finally came, Daniel stepped into the palace with humble steps and a heart racing faster than any emergency call he had ever answered. He wore his best clothes, nothing extravagant, but pressed neatly with quiet pride. He was led through intricate hallways, past silent guards and towering doors, until he reached a private sitting room. The prince was there, not in a hospital gown, but in traditional attire, seated upright, eyes brighter than Daniel had ever seen them. Though still recovering, he carried a new softness in his expression, as if a heavy armor had been set aside. When Daniel entered, the prince stood slowly, ignoring the protests of those around him. "Daniel," he said, a genuine warmth in his voice. "You came?" Daniel bowed deeply. "Your Highness, it is an honor to see you well." The prince walked toward him, each step a quiet victory over the months of weakness he had endured. When he reached Daniel, he did something that startled everyone in the room. He extended both hands and held Daniel's with gratitude. "You did something no one else could do," he said. "You reminded me that I was still alive when I had already begun to feel like a shadow. You gave me more than care. You gave me dignity when I felt like a burden." Daniel shook his head, humbled. "Your Highness, I only did what any Filipino nurse would do." The prince smiled faintly. "Then your people," he said, "carry a treasure the world does not properly honor." In a gesture that would later be spoken about quietly among staff and advisors, the prince presented Daniel with a simple yet deeply meaningful token of gratitude. Not just a financial reward, but an official letter of commendation bearing the royal seal, recognizing the contribution of Filipino nurses and caregivers in the kingdom. "This," the prince said, handing him the document, "is not only for you. It is for all of those who serve far from home, who heal with their hearts when medicine reaches its limit." Daniel accepted it with tears quietly forming in his eyes. He thought of the countless Filipinos working abroad, missing family dinners, milestones, and ordinary days back home just to send money, pay for school, fix roofs, build small houses, or give their parents a dignified life. He thought of the nights they spent holding hands that did not belong to their own family, offering comfort to strangers because they could not physically be with the people they loved. In that room, in that moment, their unseen sacrifices were finally seen. As Daniel left the palace later that day, the desert sun warmed his face, and he felt something shift inside him. He had always believed his work mattered, but now he carried proof that sometimes the quietest acts of care reach the highest places. And for you listening to this story now, there is a question that quietly remains. In a world obsessed with titles, technology, and power, what truly keeps a person alive when everything else begins to fail? Is it wealth, position, machines, or is it the simple, stubborn presence of someone who refuses to let you walk through the darkness alone? Somewhere tonight, in a hospital room, an elderly person is breathing easier because a Filipino caregiver adjusted their pillow and stayed to listen. Somewhere in a foreign country, a child sleeps peacefully because a Filipino nanny hummed a lullaby from a distant island. Somewhere in a quiet, expensive wing of a private hospital, another patient who has everything is still here because a Filipino nurse, just like Daniel, understood one essential truth. Sometimes what saves a life is not medicine. It is the heart that holds on when everyone else has already let go. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to stay with us a little longer. The world is full of headlines about power, conflict, and people trying to outdo one another. But stories like this remind us of something far more important. They remind us that dignity, compassion, and simple human presence still have the power to change lives, even in places we never see. If you want more stories that honor the quiet heroes of our world and reveal the humanity behind the headlines, you can join this community by subscribing. It helps these stories travel farther and reach someone who might need them today. And if you know a Filipino nurse, caregiver, or worker abroad, share this video with them. Let them know their sacrifices are seen, their kindness is felt, and their work carries a strength many will never fully understand. Thank you for watching. May this story stay with you a little longer than